A hiker out for a walk and ends up stumbling on something absolutely devastating, the remains of a young woman who'd been missing for months. And it's a story that really hits close to home for us because it highlights a disturbing national crisis that often flies under the radar, violence against Indigenous women. And today we're going to deep dive into this specific case.
Absolutely. It's a tragedy, and it really shines a light on a much bigger problem.
Yeah, so we're going to be focusing on the case of Sahela Sangrait. She was a 21-year-old woman from South Dakota, and we're going to be using a recent article from CBS News to kind of guide our deep dive here.
Sounds good.
All right, so let's set the stage here. What do we know about Sahela's initial disappearance?
Well, so Sahela was last seen in Eagle Butte, South Dakota, back on August 10th of last year. And she was actually planning on heading out to California, but she never made it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and initially, there was this detail about her stopping in Box Elder to pick up some belongings. And at first, it just seemed like a small thing, a little side trip. But as the investigation went on, it turned out that put her really close to Ellsworth Air Force Base.
And fast forward 7 months later,
Yeah.
a hiker makes a heartbreaking discovery.
It's awful. So in early March of this year, they found Sahela's remains, and not along the route she was supposed to be traveling, but near that Air Force base. And that's when everything changed.
So it went from a missing person case to
Something much more serious.
yeah, something much more sinister.
Exactly. And as investigators started digging, they came across a name, Quintarius Chappelle. He was an active duty airman stationed right there at Ellsworth, and he's now been charged with second-degree murder in her death.
Okay, so for our listeners who might not be super familiar with all the legal jargon, what does second-degree murder actually mean?
So in simple terms, second-degree murder usually means that the killing was intentional, but it wasn't premeditated.
Okay,
So it wasn't planned out, way in advance.
gotcha.
But what makes this case even more complicated is the whole military justice system comes into play.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that adds a whole other layer to this whole thing.
It really does. The procedures, the rules about evidence, even the potential punishments, it can be so different from what we see in civilian courts.
Why?
And that could have a huge impact on how this case moves forward and what justice really looks like for Sahela and her family.
In this case, it really underlines a much bigger problem here. The CBS article points out that Native American women are disproportionately victims of violence, whether it's murder, sexual assault, all sorts of things. It's a crisis that we just don't talk about enough.
Yeah, and we're talking about thousands of cases. In 2016 alone, over 5,700 Native women and girls were reported missing, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs has this really scary statistic about 4,200 cases of missing and murdered Indigenous people that are just unsolved.
That's a huge number.
It is a massive number.
And this isn't just happening, far away. This is happening right here in South Dakota.
Absolutely. The article highlights that dozens of Indigenous women are missing right now in South Dakota.
Wow.
It's a problem affecting communities all across the state.
So today we've really dug into the specifics of Sahela's case and how it just tragically represents this much larger issue of violence against Native American women. We've seen how those little details can become so crucial in an investigation and how the military justice system adds this whole other level of complexity. But I think it leaves us with a really big question.
Yeah.
What can we actually do? What can we do as individuals, as a society, to raise awareness and fight for justice for all these missing and murdered women?
It's a question we all need to be asking.
It really is. And we hope that this deep dive has kind of shed some light on this incredibly important issue.
I hope so, too.
An issue that we just don't talk about enough.
Yeah, we need to be talking about it more.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Thanks,